Peace, chiefs, and deers. It's Brownbird with another video. Before I begin, like and subscribe. So today's topic is going to be about the age-old issue, in which we discuss a lot within the so-called Black community or people of the Afro diaspora, African diaspora, whatever you want to call it, about the conversations about weaves. And this is not a conversation I'm making geared towards the so-called Black woman. I'm more or less trying to explore the issues of weaves when it comes to the regaining trend of men, regardless of any nation, taking it upon themselves to get a weave or a hair transplant surgery. Now, yeah, I remember growing up and, seeing the men with the hair pieces, the toupees, and all these different things. You know that when it comes to a man who's balding, the usual thing is that there's different stages, which is called Norwoods. So there's a stage of Norwood 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think the stage of Norwood 4 would be the one that would be previously called the George Jefferson, or the brother from the show Good Times, the father. Now, with this being said, I've also remember growing up and seeing men, or, as I get older, and I still see it sometimes, men that get this hair transplant or decide to grow their hair when they're really not growing their hair. And if I can find the image for you guys, I will. The procedure when it looks like it's nothing more but permanent marker being spread out across their scalp and lining up their wannabe beard. Okay, we've seen this. I've seen this, and I'm gonna show you a picture in the thumbnail or when I find it to prove it that that's what it is. Now, today I want to share a couple of things with you guys before I get up out of here to talk about this issue so that you can see it. Okay. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that Brownbird is going to go ahead and talk about Black women wearing weave and how much that Brownbird don't like the weave and all that other stuff. That's not what this episode is primarily geared towards. Now, when you search up Google images, why is it the fact of the matter when it comes to weaves, just simply putting in weaves, that you automatically see primarily so-called Black women when it comes to weaves. Now, again, this is an age-old issue. I'm not interested in trying to argue this, but I want to point out the flaw in this argument, because now you have a lot of so-called Black women that decide to argue or make the point that now you see so-called Black men wearing these weaves, these man weaves, getting these transplants and all these different things. Now, my thing to it is, it's not really a weave, it's more or less a wig. You understand? And the reason why it's more of a wig, because they put on glue and then they're attaching the fake hair into their head, whereas a weave, it's usually braided first and then you weave in the fake hair onto their head. Now, also in Google Images, what you know is this argument about the weaves that comes from the so-called Black woman, which Google picks up on because it's an age-old argument. Notice the search engine of what they say. How does a weave work, right? This is the whole thing that they do. Do weaves damage your hair? Since it's been an growing complaint from us brothers that say that, usually weaves is damaging your hair. How much a weaves cost? Tape in, sew in, weave, fusion. And look out, the fact of the matter, it's already in the hundreds. Now, you imagine that on a surface level, think about this, guys, that usually a weave is 6 to 8 years old on a woman's scalp. She has to take it off after a while, get a bonnet, and then find some new weave to purchase, then put it back on her head, and then she repeats the cycle over and over and over again. That's 12 months in a year, right? And you're averaging about a month and a half. Doing mathematics, that would probably serve you over at least $1,000 in roughly, and we're speaking from an estimate of about 4 to 6 months, that's already going to cost you $1,000. So by year's end, if you're only talking $200 standard for a weave, you've already paid over $2,000 for that weave. Now, look at this. I want to see exactly what it is. There's another thing that they put on here in order to make the argument. Now, this is the argument that, so-called Black women love to come up with, because again, in our community, for some odd reason, we love to mention other nations, more specifically, the so-called Europeans or so-called white people in this argument about weaves. Now, if you look at this search engine, it says, can a white girl get a weave? And we know already that this is geared towards the so-called Black woman's argument of saying that white women get weaves too. And of course, us brothers argue back that at the end of the day, that is because of the fact of the matter that it more or less looks like their hair texture. This is another one comparing a so-called white woman about the weave thing, okay? And that's it, what I have to talk about this. But now you look at the man weave, the images of the man weave, right? And it's a fairly representation of different nationalities somewhat. There is a primary of so-called Black men mentioned in this article. You also see so-called white men. This guy looks to be Latino, right? And the point of this is to shed light on this argument, because nowadays you have a good amount of so-called Black women that's going ahead and bringing up the argument to counteract the attack of them wearing the weave, where now they're sitting up there saying, well, men wear weave, y'all wear weave. But think about it this way. How long has the complaints about weave have been going on with the so-called Black woman? In my estimate, I thought it was since the 80s, maybe since the 70s, but since the 80s roughly, when they started making a big deal about the weaves. Now today, this popularity of getting the man weave seems to be only about a couple of years old, because pretty much around 2013, 2014, man weaves wasn't as popular as it is now. And the different things is guys have to understand the difference between a need and a want. Men don't do things just because they're trying to not take care of something or be lazy. That is not the purpose of a man getting a man weave. Usually it's the fact of the matter because he's balding, he has reached stage Norwood 4 on a chart of balding or having alopecia. Therefore, he needs to cover up only the crown of his head to the front lobe of his head in order to get that man weave. Now, in my opinion, I have no say-so over what that is. If I was really going into that direction, I wouldn't consider getting a man weave at all. I would probably more or less just wear hats or wear a do-rag or something to cover my scalp to make sure that I'm not doing that. Now, again, this is what you see with the man weave, but I want to show you something, a quick video as well. This brother right here, and even though this is not a good representation because this man right here is not balding. He actually has his hair, but this is also going to stem into something else that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in this video that I'm going to mention. Right here, you have a brother that decides to get a wig or get a weave, I guess, on his head. And it's going to turn into being something that I didn't think it was going to go into, but he does transform into a whole new person. Watch this. Fair use. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty sure that you understand where I'm coming from with that. That is a video of a man who transformed into a feminine looking man with no beard, no mustache, and straight up hair that was attached to his head. And again, I'm going to make a statement on that a little bit later about how crazy it's starting to get into our society about the weave thing or trying to transform into another person, which is going to be another argument I will make in a separate video. But I want to take you to an article into where A man decides to make man weaves and get into the weave market, especially for men. Now, here on this article, this is from Black Enterprise. This article is from 2018. I'm going to quickly read this video and give my synopsis on this afterwards. The brother right here is called Wade Menendez. He is responsible for a business he ventures out on, and I'm going to read a story on this as it goes on. Now, what it says right here is Vice is reporting on a black barber based out of Maryland is making a lucrative business creating hair weaves for men. 35-year-old barber Wade Menendez glues natural and synthetic hair to balding men's scalps and then styles them into their remaining hair. That's interesting. Menendez began installing hair over 4 years ago through the help of another stylist. Since then, his barbershop in Glen Burnie, Maryland, the W Hair Loft, has become a haven for balding Black men looking for scalp rejuvenation. Menendez also does more than just work with clients. He hosts a regular class where he's instructed over 500 hair professionals how to do what he does. The most recent class, in October, drew stylists and barbers from as far as London. Yeah, check this out. Hair weaves and extensions, traditionally donned by women, are a big business, especially with Black consumers. Market research company Mintel reports that nearly 6 out of 10 Black consumers wear a wig, weave, or extensions, which enables them to switch up their look. African Americans spend an estimated $2.54 billion on Black hair care in the beauty supply business. Yet, much of the money spent on hair weaves does not go back into the Black community, which is an argument I've already made numerous times, that you support foreigner business before you support your own business. Therefore, they're able to move up the social ladder more than you are. When you walk into a beauty supply store in an urban neighborhood or a suburban strip mall, most likely you will see a Korean owner, said hairstylist Alonzo Arnold in an interview with Black Enterprise. Arnold, in addition to being a stylist, is an entrepreneur who creates custom wigs and weaves. He is also one of the many Black people in the beauty industry calling for more Black ownership and economic empowerment. Well, that's a good start. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I can't seem to, never mind, I got it right here. And this is what he has right here. So this is more of the stuff that you're talking about. I'm just gonna read this really quickly. The last paragraph. Leah Diaz is another voice. She is the owner of the Girl Cave in Los Angeles, a one-stop shop for all the things hair and clothing. In a market traditionally dominated by Korean ownership, Diaz wants to empower Black women to be suppliers and distributors, as Black women make up the largest consumers group of the industry. Also, men are increasingly becoming consumers of beauty products that were always targeted at women. Black-owned products targeted to men of color, including products from Bevel and Scotch Porter, are strong men's grooming sellers. And cosmetic reports that millennial-aged men are driving that current men's beauty trend with younger men wearing cosmetics. Now, this may go into the video that I just showed you a couple of minutes ago. My opinion on this, however, is that the difference between a so-called Black woman, since we're gearing this topic towards so-called Black people, that there's a difference in between why a so-called Black man dares to get a weave and why a so-called Black woman gets a weave. And it's apparent off of these arguments that it's the same thing every single time, that the so-called Black woman gets a weave in order for comfort. To get a weave, because of the fact of the matter, they say that they are lazy and it's too much to take care of their hair texture. The man decides to get the weave because of the fact of the matter, he is balding. And it seems as if it may be permanent, not in his control, in order to get a man weave. So, I mean, it's a basic concept and a basic argument, but I would like to make this point because automatically the arguments that they continuously come with, tends to be very spoiled and lackluster. When we all know the reason there's a difference between why a so-called black man would dare to get a man weave, which is fairly recent, against a so-called black woman, where the so-called black man has been arguing about the so-called black woman for at least 2 to 3 decades now about her hair. And with that being said, there's another point that I was going to make, but I forgot it. We know the reason why. And so that's basically it.